Hey guys, Breadguide Gaming here. Hope you're having a good day. This video is a beginner-friendly, complete guide to CK3 economy. First, let's overview some basics with our treasury that will also lay out the video topics. The monthly income comes from three sources: domain taxes from our personal holdings, vassal taxes from any vassals, and church taxes if our religion is theocratic, like Catholicism. For expenses, there are three primary sources: army expenses, court positions, and court amenities. In the first part of the video, I will use the tutorial character to walk you through step by step on how to create a strong personal domain and how to develop it. Then we'll discuss vassal taxes, how tribal realms are different, and some alternate ways to make gold. So we're starting as Petty King Merchad, who is a feudal realm. To view our personal domain, we're going to the realm tab and look at the domain page. These are the two lands we personally hold, and they will provide the bulk of our taxes in the early game or when our realm is small and we don't have a lot of vassals. On the left here is our domain limit. This is the max number of titles we can personally hold. Too many and we get a stacking penalty, so that's why we need vassals eventually. We always want to hold the max amount possible, but I also recommend holding at least 2 complete duchy titles as your personal crown lands. So in this example, I plan to become the King of Ireland. I already control this Duchy of Munster. I just need to get the other county over here. And I'm also going to aim for the Duchy of Leinster, which has these 2 counties over here. So in order to hold the 2 counties here and the 4 counties here, I'm going to need a domain limit of 6. For the calculation of domain limit, we get a scaling bonus based on our rank. We get +1 from our Irish culture, and we get +1 from stewardship for every 6 points of stewardship we have. The easiest way to increase our domain limit is by marrying a wife with high stewardship. To get an extra +2 domain limit from stewardship, I'm going to need 18 total stewardship, so I at least need a wife who has 20 stewardship, giving preference to wives who have inheritable traits and who are highborn. So I'm pretty lucky that this girl who has high stewardship also has inheritable traits and is highborn. If she didn't exist, then this second girl is actually still worth it. Although she is lowborn and I'll lose legitimacy, since it's still the early game, it's okay if I just lose legitimacy right now. But let's marry this girl. Once I've married this girl, I can go to the council tab and she's here as my spouse. In her tasks, the assist ruler will give me 1/5 of her stewardship, but I can select manage domain, which will give me half of her stewardship. So now I have the 18 stewardship I need, and now my domain limit is 6. While we're here, I recommend putting our steward on developing the capital. More on this in the culture section. Next is our lifestyle. When we're building our economy, we want to go to the stewardship lifestyle. For our focus, we can either go domain focus for +3 stewardship to get the domain limit I need, or to allow me to get a better wife. Or if I have enough domain limit already, I go for the wealth focus for the extra income. For perks, I plan to finish the entire architect tree, since there are many bonuses we want, like reduced building costs, development growth, +2 domain limit, and also the architect trait. I go down the right and then down the left. If I have any kids, then I would educate them for the stewardship lifestyle. My current heir is already an adult, so I can't do that now. Once I finish my setup, I'm going to focus on acquiring land. I usually spend my first gold on getting men-at-arms. If I don't have any siege weapons and they're available, then I want to build at least 1 stack. Otherwise, if I don't have siege weapons, then I'll build or upgrade either armored footmen or bowmen, as they're both pretty strong early game. For this one, I'll just increase this armored footman. This is to help me conquer better. As a feudal government, I need to go to my council and use my bishop to fabricate a claim in order to declare war. I'm going to select Desmond. This can take some time, so it can feel a little slow, but that's normal. Once my claim is ready, I can spend some gold to get that claim, and now I'm ready to declare war. Note that there is as seize the earldom of Desmond. This casus belli is because in our culture, we have the casus belli innovation. However, if I click on them and I expand the results, you'll see that once we win this war, this guy will actually become my vassal, which I don't want. Instead, if I press my claim, I will personally take the title. If we forget to use a claim and instead vassalize him, that's not a problem. We can revoke the title later. So once I win the war for Desmond, I now personally hold that title. As an example of revoking titles, my one and only vassal also has a title that I want. In order to revoke a title, I'm going to need limited crown authority. so I'll spend the prestige to increase my authority. Then I will revoke the title from him. This is an act of tyranny because I don't have a just cause to do this, but because it's early game, I don't mind having the tyranny. If you don't want the tyranny or legitimacy loss, you can also fabricate a claim on Ormond. Once I have a claim for Ormond, now when I go to revoke the title, I won't be viewed a tyrant. If I was lucky, he would just give up. If not, then I'll just fight an easy war. Now that he is in prison, I can again go and revoke his title and he'll have to accept. And now I personally hold this title that I want. If our realm was bigger, then I would not try revoking unless I was much stronger, since many vassals may join the rebellion. Once I've acquired all the land, if I check my realm tab, you'll see that the taxes are much lower than my other holdings. This is because of the reduced control. You'll see that taxes are reduced by 92% and also reduces levies by 46%. So here's a few methods to increase the control. We can task our marshal with this increased control. You'll see it's going to take a while. You might also want to replace him with someone a little better. We can go to our Courtier tab, and if we scroll down, there's a Seneschal position. This can give up to 0.3 control per month based on their aptitude. Unfortunately, my nephew's not that great, but 0.1 is still better than 0. The Seneschal is usually not too expensive in the early game, and they're usually worth it just to get that control. We can fire them once everything is back under control. If you really need to or you have time, you can go into the martial lifestyle, and the authority focus will give you 0.3 control per month, and also serve the crown will give another 0.3. But usually getting architect is better. Whatever methods you choose, you see even getting to 50%, our tax is now significantly better and our overall income is increasing very rapidly. So once I've conquered all of my desired territory, now I need to manage my succession. Succession starts with Confederate partition, which means all of my children inherit equally, and our titles will keep splitting and splitting, meaning every ruler I play after will inherit less and less land, making us weaker. So let's learn some methods to keep our titles concentrated to one heir. Since I'm feudal, the easiest and best early game option is to enable a special elective succession. If we go to our duchy title and click on it, there is a add law button here. There are many different types of elective law, each with different requirements, but any of these will work fine. Since we're Irish, we can either pick feudal elective or tanistry elective. Both will cost 1500 prestige. So since I have 2 duchy titles, I'll need 3000 prestige. Once I have the prestige, then I can add the elective law and an envelope will appear. This will take us to the election for the title. The voters are the Jure vassals of the title, but if we own all the titles, we are the only voter. And if I look at my succession page, if I go and vote for my primary heir, he will inherit those de jure titles. And if I go to the other title and also vote for him as well, then all of the titles in these 2 duchies will pass completely to him. If we only have 1 elective law, then this method doesn't work perfectly, so try to get at least 2. You can also have as many elective duchy titles as you want and pass them all along, as long as you hold all the voting power. Aside from elective succession, I have an entire video that goes into more detail on other inheritance tricks, but here's a short list of some early game methods. If you have the renown, you can disinherit your secondary heirs. If your faith has a tenet that lets you request persons to become monks, you can also ask your secondary heirs to become a monk. You can start a war, and if you've forced your son to become a knight, then in the army, I can select my son and I can send him alone into battle repeatedly until he proves his quality. As a last resort, we can imprison our sons. Once they're imprisoned, we can right click and move them to the dungeon. This will lower their health and hopefully they'll die eventually. If you're in a rush, you can also execute them, although at severe penalties. Now that we've acquired some crown lands and have secured inheritance, let's talk about buildings and how to actually improve these crown lands. I'll first quickly go over the UI, which will give us a breakdown of the next few topics to discuss. For this holding, we see the tax breakdown is +1 for being the realm capital, shown by this crown icon here. We get 0.4 from Mott, which is this castle building here, and we get 0.5 from fishing net weavers, which is this trade port building down here, and the other values are percent bonuses that affect these base values. Some buildings will have effects that affect only this holding, meaning this castle itself, or it will affect the entire county, which includes all of the baronies here. Each county can have 1 to 7 baronies, which can have have different holding types. There are 3 holding types: castles, temples, and cities. This slot with the pointed corners is a Duchy Building slot that only appears in the Duchy capital. If we click up here on the Duchy title, you'll see that it says the de jure capital is the Earldom of Thomond, and that was this title here, and so it has a Duchy slot. Some holdings also have a special building slot, more on these later. Each holding can have up to 6 normal building slots, 1 Duchy slot if applicable, and 1 special building slot. Loot is gold that can be stolen when a raiding army raids this holding, or an enemy occupies this holding through a siege during an active war. The loot cannot be kept for ourselves, but this way when someone raids this holding, they are raiding the local loot and not directly from our treasury. The levies here are similar to the gold taxes, with the castle and buildings providing the base and other factors giving percent bonuses. The supply limit determines the max army size that could be fed without reducing the army's personal supply. The plague resistance reduces the infection rate, which will have a lot of penalties. More on this in another section. The type of terrain this holding has will be represented by this little icon here. The type of terrain will also determine the type of buildings we can build on this holding, and it can also affect the growth speed and military bonuses. There is also a nice terrain map to preview the area around us. The control value here, as we saw before, affects the amount of taxes and peasant levies we get from this holding. The development level gives a bonus to taxes, levies, and the supply limit of this entire county, maxing out at 50% extra taxes and levies. This is a huge amount, and I'll have a section on how to maximize it later. The popular opinion determines if peasants will revolt or not. If it's negative, they can revolt. The county's culture is important for determining the types of buildings and upgrades available to this county. The faith only affects the popular opinion but has no economic influence. So that's all for the overall UI. We're going to discuss all of these topics in greater detail now. There are 3 primary categories of buildings: fortification, which includes castles and defensive structures that make sieging this holding harder; economic buildings, which provide taxes or boost development to make you rich; and military buildings that boost your men-at-arms and provide peasant troops. The buildings we have access to are limited by the type of terrain we have, and some will be unlocked through specific innovations and traditions. Any terrain is viable and can make you a god emperor, so don't worry about the terrain you were born in. Your building strategy will depend on your circumstances and preferences, but in general, gold will solve all problems. So since we can have 6 buildings, my general build is 4 or 5 economic buildings and 1 or 2 for military and defensive options. I build the highest gold buildings first, with preference over buildings that give other bonuses. For example, in this wetland holding, out of all the buildings, currently the highest 2 are wetland farms at 0.3 and also the trade port that is already built, and it's at 0.3. The wetland farms will also give reduced building time and eventually construction cost, versus the trade port gives development growth. Both are very important, and if I had nothing built already, I would build the wetland farms first for the reduced cost and then the trade port. It would cost 100 gold to build this farm, and it only pays 0.3 per month, meaning it will take almost 24 years to pay back the original 100 gold investment. I calculated all the building payback times, and some will be paid back earlier than others, but that doesn't account for other bonuses like development growth. In fact, going by this list, trade ports are far down the list of payback efficiency, but they're one of the strongest development growth buildings, which actually makes them more valuable. Instead of worrying about the payback time, think of the monthly income as the ability to support extra men-at-arms. More soldiers means more power to enforce your will. So aside from wetland farms and trade port, I also recommend one of the slots to build the hospice building, which gives plague resistance, which will be important later. It also gives 0.2 gold, which is the second highest amount out of the buildings. This last slot, I can build either a military building, like barracks, if I'm going to go for armored footmen. I also personally like blacksmiths, as it will give bonuses for any stationed men-at-arms, and it also gives 32% tax in the late game, which on average equates to about 5 gold. I also know there will be other buildings unlocked in the next era, so I may want to save this slot for these even stronger buildings, but you can also replace a building if needed, although you don't get any refunds. Duchy buildings can only be built in the Duchy capital county, There are many options between offense, defense, or economy, and no choice is correct. Some of my favorite ones are tax offices for gold, military academies for making super strong knights, and royal reserves for development growth. Just make note of how global the effects are, as some only affect the holding and some affect all the holdings inside the duchy. Special buildings are historical buildings that are pre-built in specific locations, or they're available to be constructed in specific locations. There is an economic map filter which will show you all the available historical special buildings. There are many strong ones, and you can browse a full list of these on the CK3 wiki. Some of my favorite ones include the historical mines, as they provide a massive amount of taxes, historical universities, as they give a lot of amazing bonuses and you can stack these, and other cool buildings like the House of Wisdom in Baghdad. The Legends of the Dead DLC gives access to legends, which when you complete a mythic or illustrious legend, you can get access to the clear grounds for a legendary building decision. This decision makes it so that a special building slot will be opened inside a county that you hold, and if you complete multiple legends, you can build multiple special buildings in all of your personal domain. The location of the special building slot is determined by this order. Even without special buildings though, any realm can become an economic powerhouse, so you don't need to move your realm capital if you don't want to. Before I continue talking about building upgrades and culture, let's discuss some expenses. The army expense right now is the unraised maintenance expense, versus when they're fully raised, their monthly cost triples, aka the full maintenance. If the regiment is damaged, they will replenish at full maintenance cost, but will not if you don't have enough gold. Peasant levies also cost 3 gold per 1,000 men summoned. So if you have too many men at arms, or too little income, raising your entire army can put you into debt, especially since most wars last a few years. Debt has stacking penalties that can destroy your realm, so a few tips on reducing army costs include: you can use your marshal on the organized army task. When your army is raised, he's going to reduce it by a little bit. Your marshal will also reduce army costs by 1% for every point over 8. If you don't need your spouse for stewardship, you can also put her to chivalry to give you a little bit of extra martial. Some duchy buildings also reduce the men-at-arms maintenance cost. If your enemy is a lot weaker than you, you also don't need as many peasants, so you can manually select your peasants and preview the amount of gold you'll save if you just disband those peasants. Sometimes for wars, you might want to just only use your men-at-arms by clicking that button. Another tip is at the bottom of the military page, you can preview the cost of raising your full army. You'll see if I just raise them, cost is actually a little bit less. However, this is still a good benchmark where if your income is positive or only very slightly negative, then you won't run the risk of going into debt. In general, when spending your gold to develop your economy, I recommend building or upgrading a few buildings and then building some men-at-arms. You can even build enough buildings to sustain one stack of men-at-arms. So if you hover over the men-at-arms, you'll see another stack of armored footmen will increase our cost by 1.2, and so you can build buildings up to 1.2. That way you'll never go into debt, although you could probably build a little less than that because of all those cost reductions. I still have almost 6 extra income, so I could definitely increase my men-at-arms size a few times. So in this example, since when I raise my full army, I have about 6 extra monthly income, I could probably increase this armored footman about 4 times, and I'll spend the rest of the gold on upgrading a building. And so with my new army, if I raise everything, I actually still have a good amount of wiggle room, so I could even add more once I get enough gold. And that's how you can slowly but surely increase your power, by building a few buildings and getting the income to support the men-at-arms. The second but most easily overlooked expenses are court positions. Although each position only costs a few gold per month, they can definitely add up pretty quickly. Most of the positions could be used just to achieve a goal, and then it's worth firing them to save on your cost. Only a few positions are very useful in my opinion, so most times I don't have many court positions open. If you have the Royal Court DLC, then another source of expenses is the court amenities. These amenities do provide nice bonuses, and their costs scale scale with the size and income of your realm, the era of innovation you're in, and your government type, meaning if you suddenly increase your realm size through a kingdom or empire claim, your amenity costs may significantly increase and cause you to go into the negatives. So it's important to have a strong income in order to support a larger realm size. Additionally, there's a minimum court grandeur expectation that also scales with rank and realm size, so this further incentivizes the player to be able to afford the appropriate level of grandeur. So far, what I've done is obtained at least 2 duchies that are my crown lands and used my marshal to maximize the control on all of the lands to get 100% of the taxes. And now it's a slow and steady process of just building the buildings and upgrading them, and every now and then increasing our military size. In order to upgrade buildings, we need to learn about culture. So our culture has 2 main sections relevant to economy. We have the traditions here that can give bonuses, and we have the innovations which actually unlock the upgrades. These innovations are slowly researched over time depending on the development of the counties with the culture, the learning skill of the culture head, and other bonuses. The head of a culture is given the privilege to select the fascination, which boosts the research progress. You can see how big of a time difference there is. To be the head of culture, you need to own the most counties with this culture, which I am because I own the most Irish counties. I always recommend being the head of culture because it will let you select the fascination. For building upgrades, castles have 4 levels, non-castle buildings have 8 levels, and duchy buildings have 3 levels. Each castle upgrade also unlocks the ability to upgrade more building and duchy upgrades. For example, a level 1 castle lets you upgrade your buildings to level 2 versus a level 2 castle lets you upgrade to level 4. So generally you want to research the castle innovation first and then the economic and military innovations. Some innovations also unlocked specific buildings or additional building slots. Another key is the holdings culture determines the availability of upgrades, not your personal culture. So if you conquer a piece of land with a culture that is technologically behind you, you will not be able to upgrade your buildings as much. You can use your steward to have a promote culture task, and this will change the culture of this county to yours, but only do this for titles you plan to personally hold, since this takes quite a bit of time. A few tips on improving the research speed. Since development is super important, we want to learn how to maximize development, and that's why I recommend having your steward on the increased development task for the majority of the game. Once I finish the architect tree, then I switch trees to the learning tree, and I pick the scholarship focus for development growth, and then I unlock the scientific perk, which increases the research speed of the fascination. If my character is around 40 years of age, I'll try to finish the whole of body tree, since that will let me live longer, meaning I can use the architect perks longer. Or if my character is older, then I'll try to finish as much of the scholar tree as possible. There's other things that will also increase development or give us learning, and also the amazing scholar trait. Cultural traditions can also unlock some buildings or make certain buildings in a terrain gain big bonuses like wetlanders. There is at least one tradition that boosts each terrain, so we usually want to get this relevant tradition for our crown land terrain, which, since we're Irish, most of our lands are wetlands. To change cultural traditions, we need to be head of culture. We can click on the establish tradition button down here, and if we want to add wetlanders, we need to pay some prestige, and it's going to take a decently long time. Once you've established a tradition, there's a 50-year cooldown until you can establish another tradition, and there's a maximum of 8 traditions you can have depending on which era you're in. If you have the Royal Court DLC, you get 3 pay-to-win features. Instead of establish, you have access to the reform button. This will let you add or replace a tradition instead of only adding with establish. If you get 40 cultural acceptance, you can hybridize with another culture present in your realm. This combines the innovation progress of both cultures and also combines ones that are unique to it. This also lets a less advanced culture quickly catch up to a more developed culture. Hybridizing also lets you pick between the traditions. So out of all these options available, we can pick 6 between the ones that we like. And lastly, there's the diverge culture button. This lets you form a new culture with your old one. It requires you to have the culture present in your county, and it's very useful if your realm is too far away from where your culture otherwise is located, so it's impossible to become the culture head. So once my steward has promoted culture here, now there is one county here, and I'm able to diverge culture. This will let me create a unique culture. Another bonus is you can actually directly change your traditions. If you have extra prestige, you can spend it on traditions that you want. And once I've diverged my culture, I'm now the head of this culture. And it's only in one county. Since development is such a big part of research speed, now it's much easier to just increase the development of this county. As we just saw, development is crucial for research speed, but it also increases taxes and levies by up to 50%, which is massive. Each level of development needs 100 points, which are accrued monthly, and development doesn't naturally increase over time. You can see although there are many percent bonuses, there is no base amount to amplify. So here's a few ways to increase the base amount. The first method is to use our steward and have him use the increased development in county task. It's normal for this task to take many years, and because in the early game your overall taxes might be really low, the collect taxes bonus is not very useful. So I always start out my steward on developing my capital unless I plan to move my capital. The development task also reduces construction speed, meaning buildings are finished faster and provide their taxes faster. There's also an existing development penalty. This goes up to 87.5% and depends on your current level of development. In the tribal era, this max penalty happens when your development is at level 10, and there is one innovation in each era that increases this penalty cap. So in the tribal era, public works increases it to 20, communal government increases it to 35, urbanization increases it to 55, and Renaissance thought increases it to 90. So in this example, with the French culture, we only have the innovation that gives us the ceiling up to 20. I still haven't researched the next one to move the ceiling to 35. So that's why I have such a big existing development penalty. You can see it almost cancels out the entire bonus over here. In the stewardship tree, the centralization perk gives you 0.3 base development every month. And that's why I go down the right before I go down the left. If you have the diligent trait, you unlock the develop capital decision. And this decision will give you another 0.2 growth in your capital. It gives you some stress, but it's almost always worth it. If your culture has garden architects, you can appoint a royal gardener, which can give 0.1 to 0.7 development growth in the capital. This is one of the positions that is almost always worth hiring if you can afford it. Many buildings also provide development bonuses and either give flat bonuses or percent bonuses. These buildings that provide base amount of development growth will be available in the high medieval era, or they can be special buildings. There is a neighboring development bonus where less developed counties get a bonus from more highly developed neighbors, calculated as 0.1 per difference of level. This is one of the only sources of free development. So Thomond here has a development of 6, and if I check the development map, the more developed areas are going to be more yellow in color. So Desmond here has a development of 9. If we take a look at Desmond, he actually does not have any bonus from his neighbors because he is the most developed county here. He's only gaining development because this guy has the centralization perk. So because he's at development level 9 and we are at 6, that's how Thomond is getting a monthly growth of 0.3. And this is how development actually radiates. So if we also take a look at Rome here, Rome is very developed. It also has natural development thanks to some buildings, but it's nearby counties like Tivoli. You see how I also have a very big bonus to development. So using this knowledge and the other methods that we just said, the general focus is to focus on developing one county, typically your capital, and then the development bonus will spread out to all your other counties. This is also why, despite their high payback cost, development bonus buildings are some of the best buildings and definitely worth their cost. The development bonuses can also be stacked. So right now I have fishing nets that gives plus 10%, and that's coming from my trade port. But if I had the money to build additional buildings in my Baron's holding, like this guild hall, once that 5% guild hall is finished, you can see it actually stacks over here. So after you've fully developed your own holding, you can also selectively develop your vassals holdings, and that will also boost the growth of your development. If we have only one county with our culture, and our research speed would be very quick because it's much easier to develop only one county compared to a culture of many counties and a much lower average development, their research speed will be a lot slower. As we saw before, one trick is to diverge your culture, but if you don't own the Royal Court DLC, then one way is to start with a custom character with a dead culture, meaning that there's no counties of this culture on the map, but then you can use your steward's promote culture task, and once that task is complete, now you have a single county culture, and now you just need to increase the development of this county, and your research will be miles ahead of everyone else. Here's a list of dead cultures. This section will talk about the other baronies in a county. So each county can have up to 7 total barony holdings, with a primary castle and capital barony being held as the ruler. In the other holding slots, you can either build a castle, city, or temple. You can build any combination as long as the first 3 built are a trio of castle, temple, and city. So right now I have a castle and a temple. So I am not allowed to construct either a castle or a temple. I first have to construct a city. And once the city is built, in the last slot I can build either 3. Castle titles can always be controlled by our player ruler. Cities can only be controlled by republic barons. If you take the city title, it will even remind you that this is the wrong holding and you won't get any taxes or levies from it. So you should always grant these to a noble. If our faith has lay clergy, then we can personally hold temple titles, and they'll behave similar to normal castle titles. For faiths like insularism, then we are theocratic, and these temples are leased to our archbishop, and he will pay us church taxes. More on these later. A common question is, which holdings should be built into the extra baronies? Extra castles make it harder for the county to be taken over. The war score will be partial until all the castles are taken. So if I'm playing a small realm or need a county to be more defensive, I will build extra castles. Another benefit is that barony titles are inherited with the de jure county title. So here I have many sons, and I have in passive succession where my titles will be split. So we see that my other counties are split to my other sons, but every barony title inside this county title are inherited by my primary son. So this can reduce inheritance splitting. However, the downside is that the primary castle can have 6 building slots, but the secondary castles can only have up to 5 building slots. So most times I will still recommend holding multiple county titles instead of the barony titles. Also, only a few places have 6 or 7 baronies. Most places are going to have 3 or 4. I build temples if I am in a theocratic faith, since church taxes can easily give 50% gold, as we'll see later. Otherwise, just like the extra castle titles, having lay clergy temples is not as good as having multiple counties. I build cities if I want development, since they have an extra building called the Guilds building, which gives them extra development growth. In lay clergy faith, cities also provide more taxes, so I'll build cities over those temples as well. There are also many other vassal bonuses that I'm going to go over later in the video that can optimize these vassal taxes, but in general, these above guidelines are beginner friendly. Plagues will destroy a county's development if they're not properly managed. When a plague hits a barony, there's a scaling one-time development loss, and inside the plague page, if you click on this view plague, there's an infection rate for each barony. So right now Thomond is at 100% infection rate. If you hover over this little blue icon, there are 3 tiers of penalties when the infection rate's over 10%, over 50%, or over 80%. To calculate the infection rate, it's simply 100 minus your plague resistance. So since I have 0 plague resistance, that's why the infection rate can get up to 100. This penalty modifier also applies to each barony, even for ones without a holding. So we have 4 holdings here that are all infected, and if you look at the development decline, you'll see that each barony will contribute to the overall development decrease. There's also a scaling penalty modifier to development the higher your development is, and all this means that if you spent decades building up your development to 30, in a matter of months your development will rapidly decrease and everyone you love will die. So by the time the plague is over, you can see our development went down by half. After every plague, there's also a scaling development recovery bonus, with the better one being paid for and the worst one not being paid for. I always recommend to get the paid one, so that way your development can actually try to recover a bit. And this is another reason to have these buildings that give huge percent bonuses to development, to try to recover this lost development as quickly as possible. So here's a short guide on how to efficiently maximize our plague resistance. Since we know the infection thresholds are 10, 50, and 80, the resistances we need to prevent those are 91, 51, and 21. You can easily achieve the 21 threshold for anyone if you just build a hospital, since it will give 25 plague resistance, but it only applies to this holding, so you'll have to build a hospital for everyone in your baronies. This way though, you'll prevent the worst tier of penalties. If you don't want to build a hospital, you can try to have a court physician who is excellent, as they will provide 20 plague resistance, and then when the plague starts, there's an event for the initial plague treatment. The soft approach will give you +5 versus desperate measures colors can give you plus 15, but it risks a big penalty. So most times I will just do the plus 5. However, the problem is if we actually check the infection rate, because there's a delay between when this plus 5 event happens and when the infection happens, the plague resistance does not reduce the infection rate back down to 75%. It will only just keep it from getting worse. So that's why you need to have 21 resistance before the plague even starts. Otherwise, you'll still have the 80% infection penalty. So unless Paradox fixes this problem, you're going to have other sources of permanent plague resistance, like any of these perks, or having a plague resistance book, which is a random event that can give you a book depending on the proficiency of the physician. It's basically much easier to just always have a hospital to get the 21 threshold. Getting to 51 resistance is a little harder. You're going to always need to have a hospital, an excellent physician, and then either a good book or 1 or 2 perks. For your other baronies, for cities, the easiest thing to do to raise the resistance is you can actually revoke their title and they will inherit your resistance in the meantime. There are also 2 duchy buildings that can be built for resistance to all the holdings. The burial site can give up to 40 but requires DLC. The charnel grounds gives up to plus 20 but requires your religion to have Sky Burial's doctrine. The downside is they take up a precious duchy building slot, so I generally don't recommend doing these and instead focusing on the other methods. Other than your own RNG of hopefully getting the event, you can also get the Accomplished Forger perk that lets you buy an artifact claim, and if a nearby ruler had the artifact book that you needed, you could buy a claim on it, and after you get that claim you can just declare war for the artifact. You can also try to challenge or steal the artifact. If you do play a culture with the Arabic or Byzantine heritage, they actually have access to the sanitation innovation, which gives plus 10 plague resistance to everyone. So this is really strong, but you either have to start out as one of these cultures or hybridize with them for the heritage. Temples are a little bit easier to get more plague resistance because in addition to the hospitals, they also have access to monasteries that give a plus 18 plague resistance. So for them, they can get up to plus 43. You can actually then gift a plague resistance book to that person and they will actually gain that plague resistance. If your bishop dies, the new bishop might not get the book. So you'll have to keep giving your bishop a book. But the advantage is for Theocratic, that book applies to all of the temples that are in your realm. So it makes it a little bit easier versus for lay clergy and also cities. If you gift the artifact to that person, their heirs will keep inheriting that artifact. So basically getting to 21 resistance is pretty straightforward. You just build a hospital, but getting to 51 is a little bit harder and mostly requires you to either spam books and maybe even going for Byzantine or Arabic culture, or always going for perks like wash your hands and healthy, which personally I always do anyways. Honestly, over 91% is overkill because many times, and the first tier of infection rate is the lowest penalty, so it's not too bad. And usually with this recovery event, if you just have a lot of bonuses to the development, your development should be able to recover pretty well after you get this recovery event. One last thing about plague is that sometimes you'll have reduced control, and sometimes the control loss is big enough that that is actually the reason why you're losing a lot of taxes in the short term. But you can use any of the increasing control strategies to hold on to your taxes. So to summarize domain taxes, the general steps are to maximize your domain limit and get the land needed. Then you increase the control of those lands to extract all the taxes. Then you want to secure in your inheritance to make sure all these lands pass to your one heir. And then in between, you can construct buildings and men-at-arms and also increase your development and research speed. You also want to be mindful of your army costs, since that's the biggest cost usually, and also be careful with your court positions and court amenities. So the next section of this video is going to be all about vassal taxes. So once we've become a king and we have too many titles to personally hold, now is the time to get some vassals. In the realm page, there's also a vassal tab to help you manage your vassals. There is a maximum limit of vassals you can have depending on your rank, and it's also modified by certain things. If we have vassals over the limit, it gives a minus 5% penalty to taxes and levies, up to minus 95%. I'm going to overview each type of vassal and then I'll go over some bonuses. Feudal vassals have a vassal contract, and this will determine the tax taxes and levies they give us. At normal levels, they give us 10% of their gold and 25% of their levies. You can increase or decrease these levels, which will also modify the opinion with the vassal. If we go to increasing the taxes, we'll get 5% more taxes, but a minus 15 opinion. On the right, it will also be considered a tyrannical act. So if we want to avoid this, we need to also give him a benefit, like lowering the levy taxes. This will decrease our levies by 15%, but give him plus 5 opinion. So overall, we're increases our taxes by a little, we're decreasing our levies by a bit, and we're getting a minus 10 opinion penalty, but we won't get tyranny if we modify the contract. Since we have a hook on him, instead of lowering the taxes, we can even use the hook to force him to make this change. However, we will keep that minus 15 opinion. Down here are some special obligations that mostly benefit the vassal, so they can counter one of these tax increases. Like I can give him the right to declare war, and that would counter the high tax change. It also gives him a little bit of opinion. If the vassal is duke or higher level, there's also some special contract modes. These count as neutral changes and do not offset an increase, and they don't have opinion changes. There's no right way to use these special obligations or special contracts, so use them as you see fit. The only ones that annoy me are council rights and title revocation, so I recommend against giving these. A vassal contract can only have 3 total changes at most, not including a hook, so I can increase both taxes and levies, and then I would have to give him a special obligation and also use a hook in order to force that change. Once a contract has been modified, we can't make changes again for this vassal. It's only once per lifetime of the owner of the contract. This contract is also inherited as is, and also if the vassal had multiple titles and multiple heirs, each heir will get a copy of this contract. These contracts are also transferred even during a war if we vassalize someone, which is why sometimes after a war, some random person will force themselves onto your council, and if their contract was already changed with their old liege, then we can't change it again until they die. All that being said about vassal contracts, I generally don't bother increasing anything until later in the game when I'm much stronger and can tolerate having these big minus opinion penalties. And you'll see that in the beginning of the game too, they are only going to provide a small amount of your taxes, so it's better to just focus on building up your domain. Clan governments are slightly different than feudal governments. They still have a vassal contract, but it only has a few special obligations, and most of them are in favor for the vassal. It only gives you some bonus opinion. The actual amount of taxes will be determined by this special tax jurisdiction tab. Each of the vassals that we have here, they're assigned to a certain tax jurisdiction, and the aptitude of the person determines the amount of the taxes that are collected. If a tax collector is removed or dies, then those vassals will not pay any taxes until you reappoint a tax collector. So you always want to make sure you have a tax collector. There's a special decision here that will help you find a proficient tax collector, but you can also find one yourself, and the aptitude is based on these things. In this tab, there's also a special tax decree, and these will change the modifiers for all of the taxpayers in this jurisdiction. So changing to this tax decree will give me 25% more taxes, but every vassal will have a minus 30 opinion of me. This change, however, only affects this jurisdiction. You can automatically assign vassals to your tax jurisdiction, or you can manually change them yourself. For the jurisdiction, it doesn't matter what rank they are or where they are located physically. This is just a list of vassals that this collector is responsible for. So a general strategy is to put the vassals that love you into an area with higher taxes. That way you can extract as much tax as possible. And there are certain decrees that will give you a lot of opinion, and so you could put the vassals that hate you into a certain jurisdiction as well. So taxes for clan vassals are mainly playing around with these jurisdictions and tax decrees, and also how proficient your tax collectors are. Theocratic vassals are generally pre-made rulers, such as these prince bishops inside the Holy Roman Empire. They provide taxes purely based on the ruler's level of devotion, and they could provide a massive amount at max devotion. One interesting thing is, even if we are a different faith than the theocratic vassal, the taxes will always be 10%, even if we have the lowest level of devotion, which is sinner. A big advantage of theocratic vassals is that they will not rebel on their own. You can check this by, if you're playing a vassal and you try to add other members, you will see that you can't even add those theocratic vassals into the faction. This means that if all of your vassals are theocratic, then you'll almost never have rebellions. They may only rebel against you if a tyrannical action is taken, such as trying to revoke a title from them, then they will rebel. Or even if you try to revoke it from someone else, else, then you'll see that they might also join the rebellion. Two other advantages of Theocratic Vassals is that when they die, their realm will never split, meaning you can keep nice de jure realms and rule is given to a new person and not a family member, so that no one will inherit their negative opinion or family feuds. There is a special way to get all of your vassals to be theocratic, but that is another video. Republic vassals are primarily mayors of cities, and by default they give 20% taxes and 10% levies. Some special traditions like Republican legacy in the Italian culture lets you appoint count level republic rulers. To do this, you're going to go to your mayor and you can grant him the county title here, and now he will become a county level republic vassal. This will increase his taxes to a base amount of 30% and his levies will remain at 10%. Similar to Theocratic vassals, republic vassals also share the same ideal vassal benefits like reduced rebellions and non-familial primogeniture. For church taxes, if your faith has lay clergy, then they will just emulate whatever government type you have. So if I'm clan government, then your vassals who hold only temples, like this guy here mainly holds this temple, and he'll just be treated as normally as a clan vassal taxation. However, if we have a theocratic faith like Catholicism, your realm priest is going to lease all of the temples inside your domain. These form the church taxes that he collects. These church taxes are purely gained based on your opinion with him. You get nothing if you're 0 or below, versus if you have at least 50 opinion, you will get the max amount, which is 50% of his gold and 100% of his levies. Each of our vassals also have their own realm priest. These vassal realm priests will also pay taxes to our realm priest, and those taxes are included as part of this church tax calculation. When your realm is a little bigger, these church taxes can be very significant. You can see from our vassals that the church holdings provide more than half of the actual vassal taxes we receive. Another key thing is that these taxes are always provided to us even when we die and our heir inherits the realm. As long as this person likes us, then we get the maximum amount, and this realm priest can't join any factions with his taxes, unlike any other vassal types. This is also why I recommend theocratic faith realms to build temples instead of cities, since church taxes are so simple and so significant. So that was the basics on vassal taxes. This section will have some tips on tax bonuses. The first tip is, since we know the capital county gets +1 bonus, it can be better to have multiple single count vassals instead of one person owning all three. My second tip is there is a 50% penalty to both gold and levy taxes if we are not the direct rightful liege. So this vassal here in the Isle of Man here would be the direct vassal of this Duchy of Man title, which I don't have yet. So if I hover over his contribution, you'll see that there's a 50% penalty since I'm not the rightful liege, versus this vassal here, his direct liege would be the Duchy of Ulster, which I also don't own. However, if I check out his taxes, you'll see that it's actually only a 25% penalty. So that 50% penalty is reduced to 25% if we hold the de jure king or emperor title. If I do create that de jure title, now I am the correct de jure ruler and the taxes will be returned to normal. There is a special exception if you're the emperor and your vassal is a duke and he's de jure part of your realm, then he will also not have the penalty. The actual primary benefit of having de jure vassals is they're less likely to start factions. So when I'm conquering new lands, I try to conquer lands in a way to form a new higher title. There are also multiple perks and traditions that increase vassal taxes. Some are only for specific vassal types, like hereditary hierarchy only affects feudal vassals, versus things that don't specify a specific vassal will affect all vassal types. These bonuses will directly increase the base amount. So if the base amount is 10%, then we'll get 11% more of 10%, which is how 11.1 comes about. But if we are able to increase the feudal taxes, the base amount is now 15%, and that 11% extra is based on that. Remember that church taxes are not affected by vassal taxes because they're not technically a vassal. If you stack enough of these bonuses, you can even get your vassal taxes close to 100%, and it's most easily done with Theocratic Vassals because their base amount is so high. However, getting to 100% can take a lot of time and setup. So in general, if you aren't trying to maximize taxes as the primary goal of your game, in most playthroughs you don't need to pay extra attention to optimize vassal taxes. A last tip is that some traits or perks affect income, such as Greedy, which gives 5% to monthly income. Although in the domain page, if you hover over your domain and vassal taxes, it seems to only affect domain. It actually affects all taxes, including church taxes, making these sources of income very powerful. This next section is dedicated to tribal realms, since they behave very differently than feudal or clan realms. Tribal buildings are limited in upgrades only up to level 2, and of the buildings available, only one building gives gold other than the tribal hold itself. You also can't construct new holdings inside tribal counties. The development only affects supply limit and does not boost taxes or levies. Tribal cultures are also locked to the tribal era, which limits your technology. Your succession is also locked to Confederate partition if you're a tribal ruler. If you have a royal court as a tribal realm, you're only allowed up to level 2 amenities. Some traditions, however, will make some feudal buildings available in tribal holdings, such as Coastal Warriors lets you build trade ports in tribe holdings, which is why Jarl Born in Upland over here, he has access to the trade port down here, but they are also only limited to level 2 since you require the next tier of cultural innovation, which again were locked only to the tribal era, so we'll never be able to get to the second tier. Overall, you can see that these traits make tribal realms really limited in their late game power. However, they make up for these in the early game because of these two traits. You pay for your men at arms with prestige instead of gold, and because prestige is easier to get, you can increase your troops rapidly. Your troops can be raised and they will reinforce even if you have negative prestige. So even though I'm at negative here, each month the troops will still replenish, versus in feudal realms and clan realms, they won't replenish unless you have the gold to afford them. So a tribal realm can use a lot of methods to gain a lot of prestige, and you can rapidly build a large army of men-at-arms. A second bonus is that titles you need to create have their costs reduced by 50%, and title creation also gives a lot of prestige, meaning that a tribal realm can conquer lands and then use those conquests to create titles to create stronger troops to conquer even more land. However, if you want to stay relevant in the late game, then you want to take the adopt the feudal ways decision, which you're going to need a lot of gold, and we'll see that it mostly comes from your vassals. So tribal vassals provide their taxes and levies based on the ruler's level of fame, going up to a massive 40% gold and 75% levies. And again, because tribal holdings provide so little maximum amount of gold and levies by themselves, most of your monthly tribal income will actually be coming from your vassals. So for this realm, we have Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, and even with just distinguished level of fame, we're getting more gold and levies from our vassals than from our own domain. You can see once you become exalted among men, those taxes and levies increase dramatically. So the best way to gain income as a tribal realm is you want to try to form as big of a realm as possible, and again, hopefully a de jure realm, so in this case the de jure Empire of Scandinavia, and then you want to just increase your prestige as much as possible and you'll maximize your taxes. There are also other things you can do like raid for gold. Because of how tribal taxes work, you can even make it possible where if you only hold one county, you can still maintain power in an empire as long as you have a very strong men-at-arms army and most of your vassals like you enough, then the factions will still be too weak to rebel against you. It's still best to have multiple holdings anyways, because this will also prepare you for the next step. If you're ready and have decided to transition to feudal or clan, I recommend stockpiling at least 6,000 gold before taking the decision and making sure you have as many titles as you can hold. Transitioning to feudal can take a while, mainly because you have to research at least 70% of the innovations. The reason why I've picked 6,000 gold is once I do transition, the first thing you'll notice is I've lost a lot of manpower, and that's because most of the peasant levies were coming from my vassals, and I also lost a lot of taxes. If we take a look at our men-at-arms, they're going to cost us a lot of gold. Sometimes you can be negative, and if we do need to raise them for war, I would lose around 40 gold per month factions, so you need a lot of gold to make sure you can keep your empire. Aside from spending gold on suppressing factions, it's also so that we can immediately spend a bunch of gold on our newly feudalized holdings. So some of the holdings already have some buildings in them, and we're probably going to want to swap them for the better ones if possible. Like this one here is a very high tax building that we probably want to upgrade as soon as we can. So when we're transitioned, we want to spend a lot of our gold to get all the best taxes and just increase our taxes as much as we can. So I was able to build a few of the buildings, but I couldn't manage to suppress this faction, so I'll have to fight them. So when I do raise all of my army, you'll see that my income still cannot support them fully. And so if I have a big stack of gold, I can at least maintain their power for a while until I can build up all my buildings to keep up with them. And I can also use some of the gold to help hire some mercenaries if I still need extra manpower. And when you can offer white peace, I usually recommend it so that the war doesn't last too long. And hopefully this gives me enough time to start to finish building up holdings. So there's no perfect time to transition, but having a lot of gold will definitely help carry you over as you develop your lands and get situated. This last section of this video is about other ways to make gold, and any of these methods can be used at any point in the game. For faiths with the communion tenet, like Catholicism, you can request your head of faith for gold in exchange for some piety. You can also create your own faith with the communion tenet, and if you have lay clergy to enable yourself to become the head of faith, and eventually people will come to seek indulgences, so they'll pay you gold in exchange for piety. In the Stewardship Avaricious tree, there are 3 perks that will help you get gold. The Golden Obligation perk can be used to trade a hook for some gold, and it varies with the rank. So if you have a hook, you can demand payment from people depending on their rank. So this guy is just an earl, versus if we had a hook on a king, then it's a little bit more. Strong hooks and weak hooks don't really have a difference in the amount of gold that you get. Weak hooks disappear when used, versus strong hooks have a 5-year cooldown before you can use it again. Many events can give you hooks. You also get hooks as the house head. So if your children have gold, you can also demand payment from them eventually. You can also go into the intrigue tree for the Truth is Relative perk to fabricate hooks on people. The second perk is the It is My Domain perk, which can let you extort subjects. It becomes a decision here where as long as you have subjects, you can use this, which fires 1 of 5 events extorting a group of vassals. So we can get a little bit of gold for some penalty, versus you can get even more gold for more tyranny. What's funny is that this is better because tyranny decays over time, versus this one is a flat 10 for 5 years. So this is actually better. The third perk is at any cost, and this will give you the sell titles decision, which if we come here, you can sell trivial titles. Sometimes payment is okay, but other times the cost is a little high, so it might not be worth it. Out of the 3 perks, the Golden Obligation is probably the easiest and least disadvantageous one, but feel free to go down this entire tree if you really need a lot of gold. If you're playing as a vassal, you can try to get on your liege's council. If you have high stewardship, he might invite you himself, but the most dependable way for feudal and clan is if you can modify your contract to have guaranteed council rights. I usually give him increased levies, or I can say okay to succession rights, and then this way you can come down here and demand council position. You get a scaling monthly income and other bonuses depending on his rank. A successful siege during a war will take the loot from that county, so going to war can be profitable, especially if you balance it so that your income is positive even with your army raised. Then that means you're getting paid to conquer land. If you're a tribal ruler, then you can raise your army as raiders, and you can go to nearby holdings to raid their loot, and if you return back to your land, then you will bring back the loot and some prestige. Sometimes you'll capture prisoners while raiding, and you can actually ransom these prisoners for more gold than the raids, and you get gold scaling based on the rank and importance of the prisoners, with emperors and the heirs worth the most gold. In addition to raids, you can also randomly capture them during battles. You can also go for the intrigue tree to get the Kidnapper perk, and you can abduct people to ransom them. Some courtiers, if they have gold and you're able to imprison them, then you can actually negotiate their release and banish them from the realm, taking their gold. Another common strategy is to steal from your priest. Depending on the type of priest, they might have a big stack of gold, and you'll see he has a monthly income, so over time it can accrue to become very big. The tricky part here is if you directly imprison him here, then his gold would actually be inherited by the next priest. So in order to take this gold from him, you need your faith to have temporal revocable priest. So what I can do is I can change him to be someone else, and so now he's not a priest anymore, he's just my courtier, and he still has that gold. And now when I imprison this guy, I'm now able to negotiate his release and banish him for all his gold. You can also inherit gold. Some vassals who don't have any children or heirs, you will be the heir, and if something bad were to happen to them, then you will also inherit that gold of theirs. If you have any artifacts, you can actually sell them for gold based on this chart. For the famed and illustrious artifacts, you won't be able to destroy them unless you have the anachronism tenet. Now you'll be able to sell these illustrious and famed artifacts. You'll also gain a lot of piety for doing so. And my last tip is, if you have a massive amount of debt, if you die, then your heir will actually restart with a clean slate. So once my daughter inherits the empire, you see that all of that debt has been cleared. So those are just some tips on how to make money. That's everything I think you need to know to start mastering CK3 economy for any ruler and situation. I know there was a lot of info and it might take you a few playthroughs to get the hang of all the info. If this video has helped you, please consider subscribing and liking this video. You can check out my channel for other guides and leave a comment if you have any questions or want to see a specific topic discussed. Thanks again from Bread God and have a good day.